Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and hello. Today, we are going to present about our group financial statement analysis of Farm Fresh Berhad and Dutch Lady Milk Industries Berhad for the year of 2020 to our ACC466 Financial and Management Accounting Lecturer, Madam Siti Aisyah binti Rosli. There are 5 members in our group, which are Asmina binti Amri, Diana Amani binti Basiran, Nur Farisha binti Muhammad Zamri, Nurul Izzah binti Zuhairi, and me, Nur Rizki Abshah bin Abdul Rahman. We are from the group 1 in class CS 242 5D.
There are 5 parts in our report contents. Firstly, introduction part. Secondly, about both of our chosen company backgrounds. Third one is the findings about the both company financial ratios. The fourth one is the comparison between the company financial ratios so that we can know which company have better financial and performance. The last one is the conclusion part, where which company that we choose as a potential investor and supplier. Also, we conclude about the importance and limitations of financial statement.
Well, let's start off with the introduction part.
Financial statement analysis is the process of comprehending a company's risk and profitability. This is accomplished by keeping careful financial records on each and every area of the company's operation. They can therefore be assessed based on their past, present, and anticipated performance. As a result, it enables comparison throughout the time or serve as a benchmark for the industry. Next, financial ratios are the main tool in the financial analysis. It is the mathematical tool for assessing and contrasting financial performance and examining the connections between specific values and relating them to previous and potential future performance of the organizations. Throughout our report, we are having enough information of Farm Fresh Berhad and also Dutch Lady Milk Industries Berhad of their financial reports in their official websites. Now, we can calculate the financial ratios that are divided into 4 areas, which are the liquidity ratios, the profitability ratios, the leverage ratios, and the efficiency ratios. Each of these ratios will indicate the company whether it has a good or bad performance in a certain area. Like the first one, the liquidity ratio demonstrates a company's capacity to fulfill its short-term financial obligation, whether the business has the funds necessary to pay its creditors on time. Next, the profitability ratios assess how well a company performed during the time period under consideration. The ratios are particularly important to external users since they want to assess the business return on investment. The third one, the efficiency ratio, assess how effectively a company manages its resources to produce sales. The users can comment on how quickly and effectively the company use its resources. And the last one, the leverage ratio, assess a company's total debt burden and compare it to its assets or the equity.
Now, I will proceed to our chosen company background.
The first company background is Farm Fresh Berhad. The business started as Holstein Milk Company Sdn Berhad as private limited company in 2010. Then it changed into Farm Fresh Berhad as public limited company in 2021. The company principal activity are dairy cow rearing and milk sales. About the company background, the company owned by Loy Tuan Fei from Perak. He has deep respect and love toward agriculture. The story started as he purchased a small plot of land in Johor and imported 60 Holstein Jersey cows from Australia once he noticed that Malaysian companies were selling powdered milk. Then he grew up his company by partnering up with his friend Azmi Zainal and attracted Khazanah National as their shareholder. Now, Farm Fresh Berhad runs a dairy farm in Australia and 5 dairy farms in Malaysia. Next, the second company background is Dutch Lady Milk Industries Berhad. The company is public listed company. The principal activity of this company are producing and selling variety of milk-based dairy products. This company founded in 1963 in Petaling Jaya in Selangor. About the history, in May 28, 1963, Friesland Foods hired Pacific Milk Industries Malaya Sdn Berhad to produce sweetened condensed milk in Petaling Jaya factory. Then, in 24 September 1968, the business became the first milk producer listed in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange. Lastly, in December 2008, Friesland Campina was created as a result merger from Friesland Foods and Campina, who currently owns Dutch Lady as subsidiary.
The third part of our presentation is our findings from Farm Fresh Berhad and Dutch Lady Milk Industries Berhad. First and foremost is the liquidity ratio. Under liquidity ratio, there are current ratio and quick or acid test ratio. The calculation of these ratios is shown in the slides. As for the interpretation of current ratio, for every RM1 of current liability, Farm Fresh has RM1.18 of its current asset to pay off their current liabilities. Next, for quick test ratio, for every RM1 of current liabilities, Farm Fresh has 0.73 cents of their liquid asset to pay off their current liabilities.
Now, we are going to look at the profitability ratio. In this slide, we have calculated the net profit margin and gross profit margin for Farm Fresh Berhad. We have obtained 11.34% for net profit margin, which means that for every RM1 of sales, Farm Fresh is able to generate 11 cents of profit. And as for gross profit margin, the value we have obtained is 26.41%, which means that for every RM1 of sales, Farm Fresh is able to generate 26 cents of gross profit. In this slide, we are going to look at the return on assets and return on capital employed ratio. As for return of assets, we have obtained a value of 8.3%, which means that for every RM1 of assets, Farm Fresh is able to earn 8 cents. As for return on capital employed, we have obtained 13.13% for every RM1 of capital used. Farm Fresh is able to generate 13 cents of operating profit.
Okay, now we will calculate the efficiency ratio for Farm Fresh Berhad. For the inventory turnover, after calculating COGS, which is cost of goods sold divided by average inventory, we get the value equal to 6 times. This means within an accounting period, Farm Fresh has replaced its average inventory for 6 times. While for the average collection period, we divided average account receivable with credit sales. Then, the answer will be multiplied with 665 days and we get 69 days. This means Farm Fresh is able to collect its debt within 69 days of the accounting period. And lastly, to get total assets turnover, net sales will be divided with average total assets and the answer is 0.9. We can interpret that as for every RM1 of average total assets, Farm Fresh is able to generate 90 cents net sales.
Well, let's proceed with the leverage ratio. Firstly, as for the debt ratio, we are going to take its total liabilities, which is 210 million, and divide it with its total assets, which is 440 million, and times it with 100. Thus, we can say that 50.72% of its total assets are financed by debt, while the remainder are financed by using equity. After that, the debt to equity ratio is where we take the total liabilities, which is 210 million again, and divide it with its shareholders' equity, which is 189 million, and times it with 100. As a result, we can say that the contribution of debts is 111.11% from the contribution of investors. Lastly, as for the time interest earned, we will divide its earning before interest and rate with its interest expense. Hence, we can conclude that Farm Fresh is able to meet their interest payment when it comes due by 6.18 times.
Next, as for the Dutch Lady Milk Industry Berhad, the current ratio and the quick test ratio that we obtain are RM0.89 and RM0.42. As for the current ratio analysis, for every RM1 of current liability, Dutch Lady has RM0.89 of current asset to pay off their current liabilities. In the meantime, for quick test ratio, for every RM1 of current liabilities, Dutch Lady has RM0.42 of its liquid assets to pay off their current liabilities.
We are now back to the profitability ratio, but now we are looking at Dutch Lady Milk Industries Berhad. For the net profit margin, we have obtained a value of 6.63%. We interpret this as for every RM1 of sales, Dutch Lady is able to generate 6 cents net profit. Next, as for the gross profit margin, we have obtained a value of 32.43%, which means that for every RM1 of sales, Dutch Lady is able to generate 32 cents of gross profit. Again, we calculated the return of assets and return on capital employed. As for return of assets, we have obtained a value of 14.63%, which means that for every RM1 of assets, Dutch Lady is able to earn 14 cents. Meanwhile, for return on capital earned, we obtain a value of 99.05%, which means that for every RM1 of capital used, Dutch Lady is able to generate 99 cents of operating profit.
Next is the efficiency ratio for Dutch Lady Milk Industries Berhad. For the inventory turnover, after calculating COGS divided by average inventory, we get the value equal to 5 times. This means within an accounting period, Dutch Lady has replaced its average inventory for 5 times. While for the average collection period, we divided average account receivable with credit sales. Then, the answer will be multiplied with 665 days and we get 32 days. This means Dutch Lady is able to collect its debt within 32 days of accounting period. Lastly, to get total assets turnover, net sales will be divided with average total assets and the answer is 2.33. We can interpret that as for every 1 ringgit of average total assets, Dutch Lady is able to generate RM2 ringgit and 33 cents of net sales. Net sales.
We will now move on with the leverage ratio. Firstly, the debt ratio is 64.6% by using the formula that we have discussed earlier. As for the interpretation, 64.6% of the total assets are financed by debt, while the remainder are financed by using equity. Next, we found that the debt to equity ratio is 193.46%, meaning that the contribution of debts are 193.46% from the contribution of investors. Lastly, the time interest earned is by 57.67 times. This means that Dutch Lady is able to meet their interest payment when it comes due. Let's move on to the comparison part.
To begin with, the liquidity ratio demonstrates the company's capacity to pay its current liabilities. Liquidity ratio also indicates whether the company has the resources to pay its liability when payments are due. For Farm Fresh, their current ratio is 1.18 and it is higher than Dutch Lady, which is 0.89. In this case, Dutch Lady may not be able to meet their short-term obligation with its current asset than Farm Fresh. Next, as for the asset test ratio of Farm Fresh is 0.73, which is also higher than Dutch Lady, which is 0.42. This indicates that Dutch Lady will have difficulty in terms of paying its short-term obligation with their liquid assets. As for the value, for both companies are almost the same. Farm Fresh has slightly better advantage compared to Dutch Lady.
Next, profitability ratio evaluates a business performance during a period under review. Potential investors are very concerned about these ratios since it indicates their return of investments into the business. In other words, higher profitability ratios indicates better performance. Profitability ratios include gross profit margin, net profit margin, return on assets, and return on capital employed. The net profit margin for Farm Fresh 11.34% is higher than Dutch Lady, which is 6.63%. However, the gross profit margin for Dutch Lady, which is 32.43%, is higher than Farm Fresh, which is 26.41%. As for the return on assets, the margin that was obtained from Dutch Lady is higher than Farm Fresh with a value of 14.63% and 8.3% respectively. Lastly, for return on capital employed, the margin obtained from Farm Fresh is 13.13%, meanwhile 99.05% for Dutch Lady. As we can see from the calculations, The net profit margin of Dutch Lady is lower than its gross profit margin. The company can attempt to reduce overhead costs and other operating expenses to obtain a higher net profit margin. In profitability ratio, Dutch Lady has an advantage compared to Farm Fresh.
Now, let's compare the efficiency ratio between Farm Fresh and Dutch Lady in the year 2020. From the table, we can see that the inventory turnover for Farm Fresh is 6 times, which is higher than Dutch Lady with only 5 times. This indicates that Farm Fresh is more efficient in managing inventories as compared to Dutch Lady. However, as for the average collection period, the collection period for account receivables is 69 days for Farm Fresh and 32 days for Dutch Lady, meaning that Dutch Lady is more efficient in collecting debts compared to Farm Fresh. Lastly, the total assets turnover for Dutch Lady is higher than Farm Fresh. This means Dutch Lady is more efficient in turning its stock into sales compared to Farm Fresh.
Let's compare the leverage ratio between the two companies. The debt ratio for Farm Fresh is 50.72%, meanwhile 64.6% for Dutch Lady. Both companies are risky, but since the percentage for Dutch Lady is slightly higher, the company is risky as compared to Farm Fresh. Next, the debt to equity ratio for Farm Fresh is 111.11%, meanwhile 193.46% for Dutch Lady. For both companies, the amount of liability is higher than its equity. Both companies are at risk of not being able to settle off their debts. As for time interest earned, Dutch Lady has more ability to meet interest payments from its operating profits as compared to Farm Fresh, with values of 57.67 times and 6.18 times respectively.
Now, we have reached the last part, which is the conclusion. We are going to choose the best company if we were an investor or a supplier, and we are going to explain the importance of financial statement and limitations of financial statement. As a potential investor and a potential supplier, we both have different opinions on which company we should choose. As a potential investor, we will look at the profitability ratio. Based on the profitability ratio shown above, we will choose Dutch Lady because their profitability ratios are high, but they might need to improve their net profit margin by reducing operating expenses. Meanwhile, as a potential supplier, we will look at both profitability and liquidity ratio. Both current and quick ratio for Farm Fresh is higher than Dutch Lady. If we look at the net profit margin, Farm Fresh is higher than Dutch Lady. So as a potential supplier, we will choose Farm Fresh.
The importance of financial statement. Financial statement helps in guiding a business in the right track. It can also assess performance of the company. Other than that, it can also help standardizing financial data for making comparisons either with other company or compare it with previous data of the same company. Next, financial statement makes it easier to compare past and present performance of a business. Last but not least, it helps us to evaluate business effectiveness and risk.
There are some limitations in financial statement analysis. First of all, it is affected by inflation. Distortion will happen to the data as it is historical. From this, inflation may have taken place and the figures may be inaccurate. Next, it confuses the results by comparing different accounting methods. Due to this, comparisons will be less precise and invalid due to different accounting standards. After that, manipulating information is possible. The only sources of information for ratio analysis are the financial statements of commercial enterprises. The management has the ability to modify the numbers to appear as though the company is performing well. Lastly, financial statement analysis only takes into account monetary data, ignoring non-monetary aspects. From this, the data may not be precise as the non-monetary aspects are being ignored. That's all for now. Thank you.